Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
I'm Corey Evan. Coming up in the Weekender. South Korea's government wants to raise the seawall, but some citizens say that's just not enough. Turns out the parents of one Boston Marathon bombing victim don't want the death penalty for Mr. Sarnia. I'm chatting about free-range parenting in our continuing battle against global socialism. In Crime and Pinheads, we learn just how smart it really is to burn your rental car. Latin America gets to say adios to Sábado Gigante in our game show News Minute. And since spring is here, we talk wedding plans, specifically what not to sweat. And I hope you're not sweating your taxes. Hope you got them done so you can relax as you listen to this. The Weekender starts now.
Making sense of the week's news and the most of your weekend. From Southern California, this is the SHR Weekender with Corey Evan.
It's another gorgeous SoCal Saturday, and the birds are chirping. I don't know if you can hear it over my microphone, but I can certainly hear it just outside my studio. Thank you for tuning in to the SHR Weekender. We get started with a story out of South Korea. From the Daily Mail, mourners clashed with police in Seoul on Thursday after a mass rally drew 10,000 people to mark the first anniversary of South Korea's seawall ferry disaster that claimed 304 lives. The violence capped a tense day of remembrance that saw victims' families angrily snub President Park Geun-hye, even as she sought to defuse the situation by vowing to raise the sunken ferry to the surface. Riot police used pepper spray to disperse mourners who were infuriated by police barricades erected to prevent them from laying flowers at a makeshift altar in central Seoul after the huge rally at City Hall ended. Sporadic clashes and scuffles continued as thousands of people tried to find a way around the giant police cordon thrown across the area. Earlier in the day, President Park had flown to the southern island of Jindo, the nearest point to the site where the seawall sank on April 16th of 2014, and made a televised statement voicing her deep sorrow at the tragedy. Expressing particular sympathy for the families of the 9 victims whose bodies were never recovered, Park said she would take all necessary steps to salvage the ship at the earliest possible date. The announcement followed weeks of protests by victims' families demanding a firm commitment on raising the 6,000-ton ferry, despite the technical challenges and the estimated $110 million cost. But the relatives were still not satisfied, saying Park had failed to give other assurances on their key demand of ensuring a full independent inquiry with no government interference. Stay tuned to SHR Media. We will keep an eye on this story as it develops, and we will bring you the latest as it becomes available. Back home in the U.S., the parents of Martin Richard, the 8-year-old boy killed in the Boston Marathon bombings 2 years ago, have written a plea to end the attention convicted killer Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has received and spare him from the death penalty. Wait, what? Spare him the death penalty? I want to get to the bottom of this. In an essay written for the Boston Globe, Bill and Denise Richard ask that the case come to a close, writing, quote, "We know that the government has its reasons for seeking the death penalty, but the continued pursuit of that punishment could bring years of appeals and prolong reliving the most painful day of our lives. As long as the defendant is in the spotlight, we have no choice but to live a story told on his terms, not ours. The minute the defendant fades from our newspapers and TV screens is the minute we begin the process of rebuilding our lives and our family," unquote. On April 8th, Tsarnaev was convicted on all 30 counts against him, including being responsible for the death of Martin Richard. The penalty phase of the trial, where the jury will decide whether Tsarnaev will be sentenced to death or live out his life in prison, is scheduled to begin on Tuesday. Okay, I'm not exactly sure what's going through their minds here in thinking that by just locking him up for the rest of his life, that he'll suddenly fade from their memory. I mean, I can understand why some people are concerned about the death penalty after several botched executions in the past few years, but at the same time, you don't have to agree with me, but I still like to remind you folks from time to time, where I go to church we believe if you take an innocent life, or in this case, many of them, the law requires your life. And that's why I support the death penalty anyway. Yes, using religious basis to form my opinion. Aren't I just one of those brainwashed ones? Oh my goodness. But I believe it's right. The union trying to organize Boeing's South Carolina plant withdrew its petition for an April 22nd election, citing a toxic environment and gross violations of workers' lawful organizing rights. This from Yahoo News. The decision, which delays the date for an election by at least 6 months, was made after organizers for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers conducted home visits with more than 1,700 Boeing workers, the union said in a statement on Friday. The IAM said it withdrew its petition for the vote after 2 organizers were threatened at gunpoint during home visits that began last week. Other organizers reported hostile and near-violent confrontations, it said. About 125 IAM representatives from around the country were conducting the home visits, the union said, adding that it had filed unfair labor practice charges in relation to the organizing drive. Boeing did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The union said it would continue trying to organize workers at the plant. The National Labor Relations Board determined last month that about 3,000 production and maintenance workers were eligible to vote on whether the IAM should represent them. Under NLRB rules, the union can petition for a vote after 6 months if it withdraws the petition, but must wait 12 months if it holds an election and loses. Boeing had waged a vigorous campaign against the union, supported by numerous local political leaders. The union had earlier signaled that it might postpone the vote. An unfair labor practice filing provided to Reuters by the IAM accused Boeing of, quote, deliberately encouraging and promoting harassment, assaults, and threats of violence against union supporters over the last 6 months. It sought an injunction from the NLRB to stop Boeing. You know, it's all these violent confrontations from some of these union representatives that make me not a fan of unions in general. I mean, back in the day, they were necessary. I understand that. I mean, unions were the ones that helped drive a lot of the laws we have today. But thanks to those laws being in existence, now the unions seem to be focused more on making money, and at whatever cost, they don't care. That's my take. And this one from Business ETC. In a statement on Thursday, Sony Corporation has strongly condemned journalistic organization WikiLeaks for publishing an archive of documents and emails that international hackers stole from the company's U.S. servers last year. WikiLeaks has published a searchable archive of emails and other documents stolen late last year from Studio Pictures Entertainment by hackers. As mentioned by WikiLeaks, the leaked data includes 173,000 emails exchanged between Sony Pictures employees, along with 30,000 documents owned by the company. Many of these emails exchanged between the company executives touch sensitive issues, including strained terms between Japan and North Korea, and President Obama's preference for movies having themes that favor Black Americans. And as Jason pointed out yesterday on the Evan Miller Report, talks of a Doctor Who movie were among the documents stolen and leaked, though I do think it would be interesting to see a Doctor Who movie. At the same time, I don't think it's appropriate to leak any information about a movie that hasn't even been set in stone yet. But I'll tell you what is set in stone: our continuing battle against global socialism will never relent. They were coming home from a park on this gorgeous blossoming weekend after play. And for this, a 10-year-old and his 6-year-old sister ended up in the back of a squad car. Again. For hours this time. In the bizarre nationwide culture war over how much freedom children should have to play outside alone, the youngest combatants, Rafi and Devorah Maitiv, are the ones being damaged the most. This from the Washington Post. This is getting pretty ridiculous. Somehow we've morphed from being a village that helps raise children to a parenting police state. The Silver Spring siblings were about 2.5 blocks from their home on Sunday of last week when Montgomery County Police got a call reporting them playing alone. Oh my word.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
Quote, the police coerced our children into the back of a patrol car and kept them trapped there for 3 hours without notifying us before bringing them to the crisis center and holding them there without dinner for another 2.5 hours, their mom, Danielle Maitiv, said to her Facebook friends. We finally got home at 11 p.m. and the kids slept in our room because we were all exhausted and terrified, unquote. What a pathetic way to fight about parenting styles. Because the kids are the biggest victims in all this. Imagine the cops telling 2 young kids to get into the car as they argue that they know their way home. They know where they're going and that their dad said they could walk home. This is what happened in December. And according to this post, Devorah had nightmares about police snatching them that time. Mom and Dad were dragged into court for that incident, and the nation debated whether they are good or bad parents. Montgomery County ruled that they were guilty of unsubstantiated child neglect, which means no one could decide who was right. And while we're on the matter of kids, The Federal Securities and Exchange Commission recently opened an informal inquiry into whether the LA Unified School District complied with legal guidelines in the use of bond funds for the now abandoned $1.3 billion iPads for All project. This from the LA Times. In particular, the agency was concerned with whether LA Unified properly disclosed to investors and others how the bonds would be used according to documents provided to the Times. District officials said they were optimistic that they had addressed the SEC concerns. The news of the inquiry came the same week that LA Unified officials demanded a refund from Apple over curriculum supplied on the devices by Pearson, which sells services and materials worldwide and is a big-time supporter of the rotten core. Pearson was a subcontractor to Apple under a contract approved by the Board of Ed in June 2013. That fall, problems immediately plagued the rollout of devices to campuses, and questions soon arose about whether Apple or Pearson had an unfair advantage in the bidding process. An ongoing criminal investigation by the FBI is looking into that matter. Current and former district officials have denied any wrongdoing, including, of course, former Superintendent John Daisy. Or is it Dizzy? I mean, he's got to be dizzy for even allowing this to go forward. I mean, why spend $1.3 billion on iPads when your facilities are falling apart at the seams? Nonsense. And here's the story that Jason brought you yesterday on the Evan Miller Report. With a recent study showing U.S. women still make 78 cents for every dollar men make, what would happen if they also got to pay that percentage? One small pop-up store in Pittsburgh has made that a reality, charging women customers less than men proportionately to the wage gap. Creator Elena Schlenker dreamed up the Less Than 100 project about a year ago and said the goal is to bring the not-for-profit pop-up store to different cities around the U.S. and charge women based off the wage gap in that location. The store sells ceramics, textiles, prints, publications, stationery, all made by women artists from around the U.S. The items fall under $50, with all sales going toward featured artists. The pop-up store also holds events throughout the month that aim to empower and connect local women and girls in the community, they say. Since the project is not-for-profit, it is supported by grants and donations. They also cite one of these wage gaps in Pennsylvania, 76% to every dollar. Reflected in the store's name, 76 to 100, according to the Less Than 100 Project's website. The store will be open until the end of April, and then Schlenker then has plans to hit the road and take the store to New Orleans this fall. So, how much longer will parents have to fight back against the parental power grabbers? Why must we even have this conversation about feminism in the U.S. when women have more freedoms these days than ever before? And just how deep are these gopher holes outside my studio? Stay tuned for developments in our continuing battle against global socialism. It's break time, but when I get back, we learn just how smart it is to burn a rental car in our Crime and Pinhead segment. For those of you who are planning a wedding this spring, I have 15 tips that will help you to relax. And a Spanish-speaking favorite is about to disappear from the game show world. That's all coming up after the break on the SHR Weekender.
Don't click away. The SHR Weekender will be right back.
I'm Jason Miller from the Evan Miller Report. Each weeknight, I take you around the world with the latest in world news and politics, not the least of which what's going on in good old Washington, D.C. In short, I'm telling you what the government doesn't want me to.
Join me, Corey Evan, and Jason Miller for the Evan Miller Report, weeknights at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific on shrmedia.com. Also on the iHeartRadio app.
How you doing? John Grant here. When I'm not slaving over a hot microphone on the 405radio.com Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I check out Sean and Clint here at Sackheads Radio. We all appreciate the best political bloggers, writers, and commentators. We either get them on our shows or we make fun of them, as it should be. So check us out live Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern or forever on the podcasts on the 405radio.com.
You're listening to the SHR Weekender on shrmedia.com. Once again, here's Corey.
Thank you as always, Sackhead Sean. Sackhead Sean on the Sackheads Radio Show every Wednesday, 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific. And here's an article that's coming your way, Sean, about Monica Lewinsky's comeback from news.com.au. You don't want to talk about it? Yeah, didn't think you would. Any rate, it's time to find out who botched their crimes this week in Crime and Pinheads. Yep, it's that time of the week where we find out who did something so stupid in committing their crimes that was only a matter of time before I heard about it. First up from the New York Post, police say a Long Island man set his rental car ablaze while trying to kill bedbugs inside the vehicle. Scott Kemery suffered first and second-degree burns in the incident Tuesday outside an Eastport supermarket. Police say the Bridgehampton resident poured alcohol over the insects, then sat in the car and lit a cigarette, setting off the blaze. He fled the vehicle on his own. Detective Sergeant Edward Fitzgerald told Newsday that someone told Kemery that if he saturated the bedbugs with alcohol, it would kill them. Police say 2 other cars were heavily damaged from the intense heat of the fire. Okay, maybe not a criminal mastermind in any sense of the word, and even though the rental car place would probably eventually sell the car with a 0% finance rate, I imagine Mr. Kemery had to finance 100% of that car. Next up, a Georgia woman was accidentally shot by her son-in-law on Sunday when he was attempting to shoot an armadillo. This from Fox out of Texas. 54-year-old Larry McElroy was outside when he fired his 9mm pistol at the armadillo. The bullet killed the animal and ricocheted off its shell. The bullet struck a fence, went through the back door of his mother-in-law's home, through the recliner she was sitting in, and struck her in the back. Fortunately, 74-year-old Carol Johnson was not severely injured, and no charges were filed. Investigator Bill Smith said, quote, "She was walking around on her own power and talking. It didn't appear to be too severe," unquote. Well, Mr. McElroy, you got lucky, punk. This time. I can't imagine anything worse than that. I'm getting too into this. Moving on, from WIS out of South Carolina, a 32-year-old Sumter County man stopped in his tracks in an attempt to rob a woman at an ATM right after he saw what she was wearing, according to an incident report from the Sumter County Sheriff's Office. Paul Ralph Clark has been charged with attempted armed robbery in connection with the incident. The report says the victim in this case was attempting to withdraw money from an ATM on Highway 15 on April 6th when a white male approached her with an unknown shiny object in his hand and demanded money from her. However, the victim's outfit gave the suspect pause. Quote, "The victim stated once the offender observed she was wearing a correctional officer uniform, the offender stated, 'Oh,' and left the scene in a Chrysler 200, the report said. The victim took down the Chrysler's license plate and reported it to Sumter County deputies who were able to trace the tag to Clark's residence where he was found and apprehended." Yeah, you don't want to rob an officer of the law, because that's the quickest way to get taken down in a New York minute. Dumb criminals beware! I'm watching you. I'll see you next week in Crime and Pinheads. Spring is in full bloom, as are the roses outside my studio, so that means that love is definitely in the air, and where there's love, there's got to be marriage. So therefore, this week's rotating segment comes to us from BridalGuide.com. Here are 15 wedding details you don't need to worry about, and these are good to note for myself because I'm getting married this June 6th. At least those are our plans. Because, yeah, there seem to be a million details to plan about the wedding. Myself, I'm in charge of the wedding cake topper, and once I post up the picture of our wedding cake topper on our Facebook page, which I will do after the wedding, you'll understand exactly why I consider it to be our baby. At least until we have a baby. But here are 15 things that you can safely and cleverly save on without anyone noticing. First of all, it's the wedding guest list. If you're worried that you'll offend people by not inviting them to your wedding, stop it! Of course you wouldn't leave out your nearest and dearest. I'm inviting my mom to receptions, of course. And anyone else you're considering would likely be flattered to be invited but not bothered if they're not. Your best bet is to tighten your list to make some wedding invitation list rules and stick to them. That is, first cousins but not second. Spouses and live-in or serious partners but not random dates. Your boss but not your whole office. And so on and so forth. Second is the wedding flowers. First time you've gazed upon your wedding reception site, you saw veritable fields of flowers, right? You can go to Michael's and get flowers that will last all the way to the wedding date, and possibly many years after that, depending on how well they're made. The third one is the reception cocktail hour. Guests with everything from sushi bars to towering displays of cheese, to past hors d'oeuvres, to pasta and carving stations. evaluate your guest list and see what will fit most of them. Because some of them probably won't come for the food. They just want to come, say congratulations, and then afterwards they'll head home. The fourth one is the dessert table. Keep that simple as well, because pick a few key items and focus on those. You can have several flavors of those, but you don't have to include every single dessert ever made. I mean, the cake's probably going to take the cake on that one. You see what I did there? The fifth one is the drinks. For example, at my wedding, we're not going to have alcohol because I'm a Mormon and therefore no alcohol. It's bad for you anyway. So you can substitute with sparkling grape cider, or mix together some little concoction of your own and pass that off, and most of the time it'll pass the test. Number 6, the 5-course wedding reception meal. You're worried about whether reception guests will go hungry or not. Depending on what time of day you're having your reception, you could probably plan a little lighter and everyone will still be full and satisfied, and besides, if you overload them with dinner, none of them are going to hit the dance floor afterwards. Number 7, the invitations. Of course, you may want to have, engraved or letterpress wedding invitations and heavy cardstock, but it does get pretty expensive. So if you're a DIY kind of person, make your own. Go through your options and pick the ones that are a good balance between elegance and cost. Number 8 is the wedding cake. You don't have to have all 5 layers, and it doesn't have to be all the different flavors. Just pick the flavors that you do like the best, and keep it simple that way. Because the bigger the cake, the more it's going to cost to make and ship and all that sort of stuff. And here's a tip that I'm going to throw in. Fondant, well, it looks pretty and it's easier to work with in some cases. It's not the greatest tasting frosting for a cake. So if there's room to simplify the design, go for a buttercream or cream cheese frosting instead. Because in my mind at least, not only should a cake for a wedding look great, it should also taste great. Number 9 is transportation. If you want to show up to your wedding reception in a limousine, go ahead, but if you don't have the money for that, just take your car to the car wash and make sure it's all polished up for the wedding reception. Some brides feel they have to give wedding favors, but you can do without those, because those are also expensive, and besides, you could probably get away with putting M&Ms on each of the dining tables, and it'll save a lot of money that way. Now, some people will obsess for years about where they want to have their wedding reception, but in this tough economic climate, be prepared to forego a certain venue if it turns out it's going to be an expensive venue. Besides, you could probably set it up in a neighbor's backyard if it's big enough. Or if it's raining that day, just have it at a church building and just gussy the place up to no end. Number 12 is the rehearsal dinner. You've already planned a major event, your wedding reception. You don't have to make the rehearsal dinner a mini wedding by booking an expensive restaurant or another catering place. If you can have it in the home of someone willing to host, just do something casual like a backyard barbecue, or ask your wedding caterer if he or she is willing to cater it in a private home for a lower fee as part of your wedding package. On an unlimited budget, specialty linens add sparkle and a special touch, but number 13 is something that you should think about a little more carefully. Because sometimes basic white linens, which are often made of cotton, have kept their classic good looks. You can perk it up with ribbons and all that sort of stuff, but lace? Not really necessary, especially if there are going to be kids at your reception and are probably going to make a mess. Which is fully expected, and I fully understand and accept. Number 14, focus your energy, your worries, and your money on your dress, ladies, not your shoes. And here's a tip that I'm going to throw in to bolster number 14. Don't wear high heels at the reception. I mean, they may make you look a few inches taller, but they're really not necessary, and they're bad for your feet, especially when you start dancing. Wear ballet flats. And based on who's coming to the wedding reception, sometimes you don't have to make a big impression. That's number 15, the final item on the list. Because your friends are already expecting you to be working very hard to make this a night to remember. Even if you just put in a little bit of effort by tying some sashes onto the back of chairs and all that sort of stuff, and stand at the entrance to greet everyone, I'd say that's good enough to make a good impression. So don't you worry your sweet little heads about the wedding reception, folks. Just make it to your wedding day intact. That's all you really have to do. Hopefully some of this advice has hit home, and hopefully I've simplified some of your wedding nights. But if not, I'm sorry. Coming up after the break, Latin America says goodbye to Sábado Gigante in September in our game Game Show News Minute. Plus, our tip of the week involves saving water the easy way. And you'll find out just how simple it is after the break on the SHR Weekender.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying calf for the stupid pro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
I'm Corey Evan, the Game Show Geek. Here's your Game Show News Minute for Saturday, April 18th. Univision has announced that the top-rated variety show Sábado Gigante is ending after more than 53 years. The show, hosted and created by Don Francisco, will air its final episode on September 19th. The network has not said exactly why Don Francisco is ending the show, and I'm certain that many Latin Americans are going to protest its ending, demanding that they hand down the production to a new host and new production company if that's the case. I mean, ay! CBS Daytime will celebrate the 42nd Annual Daytime Emmy Awards with a special week-long live Twitter chat event featuring stars and producers from across the network's Daytime Emmy Award-nominated lineup. It begins Monday with cast and crew from The Talk, The Bold and the Beautiful, Let's Make a Deal, and The Price is Right, among others. And Sci-Fi announced Wednesday that Zachary Levi, star of NBC's Chuck and upcoming Heroes Reborn, will executive produce and host the game show Geeks Who Drink through one of his production arms, The Nerd Machine. It'll be weekly based on the pub trivia contest of the same name, which has become a nationwide phenomenon with more than 25,000 people participating in over 600 bars across 35 states. It's produced by Kinetic Content and will premiere on Sci-Fi Thursday, July 16th. Alright, that's what I've got for you today in your Game Show News Minute. I'm Corey Evan. Have a great day. Okay, while I'm not one to hit up the bars to do game shows, this sort of thing, if I'm ever asked to host one of these bar quizzes, the only condition that I will ask from them is that I don't have to drink any of their alcohol. And hopefully they don't spike my Coca-Cola with any either. But never mind, it's on to our money-saving tip of the week, saving water the easy way. Now, I live in Southern California, which is, of course, affected by a drought, which we at SHR Media have reason to believe is an artificial drought because you know it never rains in California, and even when it does, it's only like 1 or 2 days, tops. But at the same time, we are stuck with a drought, so we have to respond to them whether they're man-made or not. So here are a few points that you can use to help save water around your property, whether it's big or small. Get a trigger nozzle for each of your hoses. That way you can adjust exactly how much water you use while watering, and once you let up off the trigger, it shuts off automatically. And of course, don't forget to shut off the spigot, especially if it's a leaky spigot. If you have a sprinkler system, program it to run at night. Now that the weather is starting to warm up a bit, you can get away with watering at night. And make sure that it's only running on legal nights. Of course, you'll have to consult with your local authority to find out what nights those are. But here's the biggest one that you need to know about, and it's a water sucker in itself. Pull the weeds. Yeah. Those suckers, they're plants too. They need water to survive just as much as your regular plants do. And of course we don't want weeds to survive, so cut them off from the water at the source. Get them out of the ground. Yep, that's right, just reach out, firmly grasp it toward the base. That way you get the bulk of the root and it won't come back as quickly afterwards. And just give it a good yank. And on that note, that is your SHR Weekender for this Saturday, April 18th, 2015. Follow us on Facebook.com/SHR Weekender and tweet us at SHR News Desk. You'll be glad you did. For all of us at SHR Media, I'm Corey Evans saying thank you for listening. Make it a great weekend or not. The choice is yours.
Corey will be back next weekend on the SHR Weekender. For more information on today's program, go to shrmedia.com. Thank you for listening.